It began like any other day at the military base. Soldiers followed their schedules with mechanical precision. But today, there was a palpable buzz in the air, something electric and unspoken. Word had already spread. Jungkook of BTS, now simply Private Jungkook, would be delivering a speech. For months, fans had speculated about his service, his silence, and how he was adjusting. But no one anticipated that this event would become a turning point, not just for ARMY, but for the soldiers present and perhaps Jungkook himself. The camp hall was packed. Even those with the hardest exteriors looked curious, some even nervous. Cameras were limited. Phones were banned. It was meant to be a simple internal ceremony, but as Jungkook stepped up to the podium, everything changed. He wasn't in performance gear. No makeup, no glittering mic stand, no backup dancers. Just a soldier in uniform, his hands gripping a small piece of paper, his eyes scanning the room filled with fellow servicemen and a few dignitaries. Why did the room fall so silent the moment he began to speak? Because everyone could sense that this wasn't just a speech. It was something heavier. Something from deep within. Something that had waited 10 years to be said. His voice didn't tremble, but it wasn't the booming confidence of a stadium performer either. It was quiet, grounded, almost too real. "I want to share something personal with you," he began. A simple line, yet it felt like an emotional detonation. People leaned in, ears sharpened, hearts strangely pounding, and one saw it coming. The tears. Not from the audience. From Jungkook. "I've spent more than 10 years being Jungkook of BTS. But today, I stand before you simply as John Jungkook, son of a woman who gave up everything for me." With those words, a truth long buried began to rise. Jungkook wasn't just thanking fans. He wasn't just doing PR for enlistment. He was delivering an emotional confession, one that centered around his mother, the woman who had stood behind the scenes while her son became one of the biggest global icons of the 21st century. "I never got to say this publicly because I didn't want to cry," he admitted. "But during our busiest years, when we were flying from country to country, I used to miss her birthday. I never told her I was sorry." The confession stunned the room. Everyone knows idols have sacrifices. But Jungkook, known for his strength, energy, and seemingly perfect composure, was now cracking open a door that fans had always suspected existed, but had never dared walk through. He continued. "She used to stay up all night when I was on tour. She used to text me quotes to keep me strong. I barely replied. I always thought, I'll tell her everything when I have time." Time. That was the core of his pain. That even with fame, money, love from millions, time had slipped through his fingers like sand. The speech shifted, but not away from emotion. Jungkook's voice grew firmer, as if his military training was giving him the strength to hold himself together. "When I joined the military, I thought I'd lose part of who I was. But I didn't expect to find something new. Silence. Reflection. And in that silence, I realized I had never faced myself fully. Those who sat in that room weren't just seeing an idol speak. They were witnessing a transformation. Jungkook was recounting nights of exhaustion, days when he questioned everything, and the painful contrast between global applause and internal emptiness. One night during training, he said, I broke down. Alone.
No cameras. No lights.
Just me in a bunk bed, realizing I didn't know when I had last really talked to my mom. This wasn't fan service. This was raw vulnerability. He looked up. The army made me understand that being strong isn't about how many push-ups you can do. It's about how honest you can be about your regrets. It struck the soldiers in the audience in a unique way. Many of them, too, had left behind mothers, fathers, partners, siblings, people they hadn't thanked enough. In that moment, Jungkook was no longer an idol.
He was one of them.
Suddenly, Jungkook unfolded a second piece of paper. It looked worn, as if he had carried it for weeks. This is a letter I wrote for her. I wasn't planning to read it here, but I think maybe I need to. The hall grew even quieter, if that was possible. He began to read. Iyama, I don't know when you'll hear this. I don't know if I'll have the courage to say these words in front of you. But I want you to know that every song I sang, every stage I stood on, I was carrying your love with me. I used to think being a good son meant making you proud. But I realize now it also means being present. And I wasn't.
I'm sorry.
For the missed calls, for the birthdays I forgot, for not asking you how your day was. You never asked for anything. Not once. You only ever said, be healthy, be happy. And I made you worry. So many times. You watched me grow from afar when you deserved to be right beside me, and I'm going to do better. I promise. Silence. Then a single sniffle from the back row. Jungkook folded the letter again. That's what I needed to say. The audience didn't applaud. Not because they weren't moved, but because clapping felt too small, too crude for what had just happened. The silence in the hall didn't fade quickly. It lingered like fog, thick, heavy, and unmoving. Jungkook stepped away from the podium and sat down beside the other soldiers, his head slightly bowed. But the stillness didn't last long. Something happened that caught everyone off guard. Even Jungkook, the soldier, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 30s, a decorated officer known for his stern demeanor, stood up. His name wasn't important to most in the public, but inside the camp, he was legendary. A man who had faced border skirmishes, loss, and long deployments. He had never once shown emotion publicly, and yet he was crying, not dramatically, not loudly, but unmistakably. He cleared his throat. "Private John," he said, "you reminded us all that no matter how strong we try to be, our hearts are still human." The man walked toward Jungkook, removed a badge from his own chest, and pinned it gently on Jungkook's uniform. "You've earned this. Not for your fame, not for your music, but for your courage, the kind that comes from admitting your pain." The room erupted, not in applause, but in a quiet ripple of emotion. A few soldiers stood, then more, not to cheer, but in silent solidarity. It was as if, in that moment, everyone had been given permission to feel something they'd been holding back. Jungkook stood once more. His eyes were glassy, but he smiled. A soft, grateful curve of the lips. "Thank you, sir. And thank you, all of you." And then came the words no one expected. "Can I sing something?" No one moved. Not a single breath disturbed the tension as Jungkook slowly walked back to the front of the room. There was no mic, no band. Just him, a soldier among soldiers, standing with an impossible silence surrounding him. He cleared his throat gently, nodded once, and began to sing. It wasn't a BTS hit. It wasn't a chart topper. It was a lullaby. One his mother used to sing to him. "Guriega isiosio hengbakeo." The words floated in the air like a ghost from another life. The softness in his voice cracked through the emotional tension in the room like a chisel against marble. Some soldiers lowered their heads. Others closed their eyes. Jungkook wasn't performing. He was remembering, reliving, healing. Tears streamed freely now, not just from him, but from the most unexpected corners of the room. Hardened men, youthful recruits, officers. Everyone, his voice cracked, but he didn't stop. He held the final note for an extra second, as if offering one last moment to his mother, wherever she might be. When he finished, he bowed. Deep, sincere, not as an artist, but as a son. "I sang that to myself the first night I couldn't sleep here," he said. "It made me feel close to home." And that's when something surreal happened. One by one, other soldiers, some with thick accents, some who likely didn't even know the song, began to hum it. Quietly, in unison. It was no longer just Jungkook's memory. It had become a collective echo. The commanding officer stepped forward. That, he said, voice thick with emotion, wasn't a performance. That was history. Jungkook saluted. "Mission complete," he said, half joking, but the lump in his throat betrayed how deeply he meant it. But no one was ready for what came next. When the formalities ended and the officers signaled the dismissal of the gathering, No one rushed to leave. The lights dimmed slightly, yet something still glowed in the room, a feeling, a warmth that couldn't be turned off with switches. Jungkook was still standing near the podium, surrounded by a few soldiers who didn't want to break the spell of the moment. One of them reached out, not for a selfie, not for an autograph, but to shake his hand. That single gesture rippled. More soldiers came forward, not in chaos, but in quiet respect. They asked to speak with him privately. One soldier, eyes glistening, whispered, "Your words gave me the courage to call my dad. I haven't spoken to him in years." Another soldier removed a worn photo from his wallet. "This is my mom. She passed last year. I didn't cry. Until today." The moments piled up like waves, not crashing but gently reaching the shore. Each one added to the quiet tide of humanity Jungkook had stirred up. Later, in the emptying hall, a sergeant approached him with a small box. "These are letters," he explained, "from your fellow soldiers. We wrote them during night exercises. We didn't know how to say these things out loud. You gave us that chance." Jungkook opened the box. Inside were dozens of folded notes. Handwritten.
Raw.
Confessions. Apologies. Promises. He didn't read them all at once. He just placed his hand over them gently, like they were sacred. That night, after the hall emptied and the last footsteps echoed into silence, Jungkook stayed behind. Alone, he sat on the edge of the stage, reading one letter at a time. Tears came slowly, quietly, and oh music. No lights. Just truth. For once, he wasn't the boy from Busan or the global pop sensation. He wasn't even Private John. He was simply a son who had found peace. Everyone held their breath as Jungkook led his mother to the chair next to his. He stood again, this time without paper, without rehearsal. Just him, speaking not to the world, but to the people in that room who had witnessed every tear, every crack in his voice. "Today," he said, turning slightly to face both the audience and his mother, "isn't about saying goodbye. It's about beginning again." A subtle shift filled the air. The weight of grief, regret, and longing seemed to gently give way to something new. Hope. Jungkook's voice no longer trembled. It rang with a quiet determination. "I joined the military thinking I would serve quietly, fade into the background, disappear from the spotlight. But somewhere along the way, I found my voice again, not as a performer, but as a person." His mother looked up at him, tears drying on her cheeks, her expression a mixture of pride and peace. For years, she had seen him through screens, glossy magazine covers, award stages, all the places a mother can't quite reach. But here, in this hall, she saw her son. Jungkook took a breath and spoke again. "We all carry things we don't speak about. Regrets. Words we never said. I don't want to carry mine anymore." He turned toward the soldiers. "Some of you have written letters you've never sent. Some of you miss someone you're afraid to call. I want to ask you to do one thing. Before you leave this place, tell them. Say it. Whatever it is." A hush fell over the room. Not the silence of awe or emotion, but a stillness of realization. Jungkook wasn't just pouring out his heart. He was passing on a message, a mission, a legacy that didn't require fame, only courage. He turned back to his mother. "I know I can't undo the years, but I want you to know that the next decade of my life belongs to you too. Not just to music, not just to fans, to the woman who gave me everything." She took his hand, and the gesture said more than any speech. The room, despite its military formality, had transformed into something sacred, a confessional, a reunion, a moment etched in time. And then Jungkook surprised everyone again. He walked toward the side of the stage, picked up a small guitar, clearly borrowed from one of the music rooms, and returned to his place. The soldiers straightened up, unsure what was coming next. "This isn't a concert," he said, smiling. "But I'd like to leave one more song in this room. One that isn't in any album. One I wrote here, between drills, on the nights I couldn't sleep." He strummed gently. The melody was soft, tentative, like a secret being told for the first time.